Hi, I'm Betsy, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Betsy.
I am so grateful to be here. Thanks for asking me to speak. Whole hour. Go, I have to talk about myself for a whole hour? That's nuts. I used to be able to do that really well. I really, really want to welcome our newcomer who's here for the first time. It's really, really scary at the beginning. So, what we do when we speak is we're supposed to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And so for me, what happened I want that to come sooner than later, because it's really easy for us to talk about our what we call our drunkalogs, right? It's really easy to just get caught up in our old past stuff. And so I'm going to try to keep that part briefer and talk more about what it's been like in recovery for me, because I've been doing this for a little while, and I have this really, really great life that I really want to talk about that more than the drunken part. But as far as background, I'm the fifth of six kids from an alcoholic family. I grew up in the Midwest in Chicago area, and it was just the typical Midwestern thing where you do not let anyone know what's going on inside your house, right? You make things look good on the outside, and you don't talk about what's going on the inside. So I had no idea that other families lived differently, right? I thought alcohol was just a part of everyone's life because that was part of our family life all while growing up. And, I was kind of shy, but I was a pretty good kid. I was the good kid that maybe if I'm really good and really quiet, then they won't yell so much, or they won't fight so much, or they won't drink so much, right? As if I had that kind of control. But that was kind of my MO when I was young. And I was good in school. I was, pretty, academically, I could, excel there. And so that gave me, just enough self-confidence that there was something that I was good at. But for the most part, I just had no idea who I was. I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing other than to get good grades and not get in trouble. And that was pretty much my whole childhood. I now know that I had an outside issue, that I was suffering from clinical depression when I was a kid. I didn't know that at the time. Nobody talked about, that it's not normal to, cry all the time when you're in middle school and, and want to kill yourself. And, nobody talked about that. So I just thought that was normal. And then I started drinking in high school, and that started to help me feel maybe just a little bit more like I fit in. But I didn't, my first drunk, I did not have fun. I wasn't one of those that oh yeah, this is it. This is my superpower. Alcohol is the best thing ever. That was not my story at all. I actually, I think I was around 15, and I was on the gymnastics team, and I got together with some of us, and the older girls on the team were like, hey, we're going to get together and we're making these drinks or whatever. And all I ended up doing was crying. Oh, there's a surprise. And getting in a big fight with my best friend because she told me she liked the boy that I liked. So, that was my fun drunken time. And then we would go out, and that's just what everyone did. In my town in high school, there wasn't a whole lot to do. We would just get together and find out who could get alcohol, and then we would go and drink and just act stupid. I was really jealous, though, of my girlfriends who could go and, they would have 1.5 beers, and they would just be all cute and happy and tipsy, and I'm just when is that going to happen? Okay, maybe I need another one, and more and more and more, and it was always I needed more, and I could never get cute, happy drunk like that. Just never worked for me. I always overshot the mark. So, looking back, I definitely drank alcoholically from day one, but I wasn't, addicted to alcohol yet. I was young. My brain was still forming, that whole frontal cortex thing going on. And so it definitely affected me. And, I go off to college. Again, I got into a good school because I was, got good grades and stuff, and still just couldn't figure out why I was so miserable and sad and crying all the time. But then I would go out and drink, and now I'm like, okay, well, now I'm going to fraternity parties, and it's the whole college scene, and, guys and all that fun stuff that happens in college when you drink and go to fraternity parties, right? So, not pretty. I managed to, get okay grades, but I went from, the top of my class in high school to a college where everyone was coming from the top of their class, and somebody kind of had to be more toward the bottom, so I was pretty good at that. And, I had friends, people liked me, on the outside, I put together this really, really good persona of having my shit together. But inside, I was dying, and this had been going on since I, was a kid, but especially since I started drinking. So even in college, even at that young age when everyone was partying the way I was and everyone would wake up and be hungover, and I still had that horrible sense of like, oh my God, what did I do the night before? And why did I do that? And why didn't I get up and get to class on time? Now I'm going to fail this class. Or, I never, after drinking, I never once felt like, oh, that was fun, but yet I couldn't wait to do it again. And I think a lot of us can relate to that, right? I was using it to cope with life. I was using it to check out. I was using it to be okay with myself enough to make all of you think that I was okay. And then after college, I go, well, actually, no, there was a little bit in there. I had a really bad night. I dropped out. I decided that because I was depressed and broke and miserable, and I was wasn't telling anyone because I didn't know how to ask for help. So I was practically starving. I wasn't eating. I was just spending all the money I had on drinking. And one night I went out and I passed out. In the house that I lived in, they couldn't revive me, so they called an ambulance. Well, the woman that owned that house, she was like, you really need to go talk to someone, right? Because, I had alcohol poisoning. I probably weighed barely 100 pounds, and my blood alcohol level was 4 times the legal limit. And my denial and the walls that I had up were so huge that I did not even begin to realize that there might be an issue with my drinking. And so I went and saw this counselor that she suggested, and I remember practically arguing with her. It's well, I have a really high tolerance, don't you know, and all of this. And I was just so not ready, right? Not even a clue. So then I took some time off, and I moved back to my parents, and I worked a couple jobs so that I could afford, and I transferred to a different school, and I did the same old shit there. But I got through, and I graduated from college. And then after college, I was living in the city of Chicago, where everyone was doing the same thing I was, right? We're in our early 20s. We're all working jobs, partying at night, going to the bar on the corner on the weekends, watching the games. It was a really fun, city and a fun time. So I thought I was okay because everyone was doing what I was doing. But the difference was they were abusing alcohol, and I was severely becoming addicted to alcohol. And pretty soon, around, maybe 25, I'm planning to go to graduate school. And I'm noticing that all of my friends are oh, I'm not going out tonight. I have a big meeting in the morning. Or they're getting married. Or they're, having their first kid. And I'm you people are so boring. Why won't you, why are you doing all this stuff? And so I started to, find my lower companions, like it talks about in our book, to hang out with. And I traipsed off to graduate school, and I'm not doing so well there either. And still, my denial was so huge and so strong. But somewhere in those years was where I crossed the line. So I do my geographic. I get this really good job after grad school. I move to the East Coast, to Wilmington, Delaware, where I don't know a soul. And I'm going to start over, right? I'm going to start all over. And where am I going to go meet people? I'm going to go to the bar, right? Because that's what I do. I thought that because I drank in bars and drank in a social setting, I thought that made me a social drinker. No, I was never a social drinker. I was a pig drinker. Like, I just always needed more. And then I would wake up in strange places with strange people, with that incomprehensible demoralization, telling myself I am not going to do this again. And I would tell myself over and over, I'm just going to go out after work and have one beer. I'm just going to have 2 beers with my friends. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to get up and feel good and go to work. I couldn't. Once I put that alcohol in me, as it talks about in the doctor's opinion in our book, something happened to me. My brain is different from normal drinkers. Once that molecule gets in my brain, something happens, and I cannot stop. And I never know what's going to happen, and I can't control it. And so I went downhill really fast. I was only 28 years old. I was single, so I didn't have a whole lot of stuff to lose. But I had completely lost myself. I had no idea who I was. I had no self-esteem, no dignity. The only thing holding me together was the ego of, being good at my job. But I saw what was happening, and I knew I was going to lose that job. By this time, I had become addicted to alcohol to the point that I was already maintenance drinking by the time I was in my, later 20s. Whereas if I stopped, I had the shakes. I had to go home at lunch and drink so I could go back to work and start and, get through the rest of the day. So somewhere from something greater than me, whatever you want to call that, higher power, God, whatever it is, something intervened in my life. And on a given Wednesday afternoon, for no reason at all, I did my usual. I went home from work. I had myself a nice drink at lunch to calm my nerves and get ready to go back to work. And I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror. And whatever I saw there was something that just had me say, I can't stand you. I can't stand what you're doing. I can't stand this life, and I can't do it anymore. And this was in 1993. They had these big, huge computers that they had given us to take home. Like, they took up like your whole table. And I sat down, and email was this new thing, right? And so I sat down and I emailed my boss, who was actually my boss's boss's boss. It was like the director. And I said, I have a problem and I need help. That was not me that did that. I wasn't ready to stop. I was in that jumping off point where I didn't want to die necessarily, but I didn't want to live. And that was a really awful place to be. And because this was a big company, they got me into a rehab. And I went there, and I have not had a drink since that day. And that, I don't know why. Why did I get it and so many other people don't? Why am I still here 30 years later and I've watched so many people die of this disease? It's not for me to ask that question why anymore. All I know is that I'm a miracle because I absolutely 100% believe I would have taken my own life very soon after that if I had not stayed sober at that time. I didn't really know much about AA. I went to rehab and got, we call it the $20,000 big book, right? Where I got introduced. Fortunately, I went to a 12-step based rehab center, and they taught me what AA was, and they brought in meetings and had us do a lot of meetings and a lot of work. And the only thing I did right at the beginning was I did not pick up a drink, no matter what. That was the only thing that I did right. I thought I wanted to be this perfect AA student, right? Because I'd been a good student in school. Oh, now I can go to AA and be a good student, right? But I had walls up. I still was it's so crazy that I could be so full of myself and yet hate myself so much at the same time. We call that being an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And the first time I heard that phrase, it hit me so deep. I'm like, oh my God, that's me. I was either way better than you or the lowest piece of dirt on earth, and there was nothing in between. And, so it took me a little bit. I am not one of those people that came into AA and said, oh, I'm home, you're my people. everyone's experience is different. I wish that was, because I probably would have gotten healthier and, gotten more of the promises and the gifts of sobriety sooner, but I wasn't. My denial was still really strong. I still had huge walls up. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't trust myself. But I had, like I said, my ego was tied up in this job that I had that was a pretty good job, and I was also having to go, pee in a cup on a regular basis because they paid for rehab. So for a little while, that's one of the things that kept me from drinking. But they told me to just keep coming back, and I did that. My first year of sobriety, all I did was go to work, go to the gym, because I had to get out like physical energy, and go to a meeting. And I went to a meeting every day, and then I would go home. Maybe I'd watch TV or read a book or something, and that was all I could do. I had no idea how to do life without drinking. I couldn't go to the movies without drinking. I couldn't go to, a baseball game. I couldn't do anything because I didn't know that there was a whole world out there of people that did things outside of their house without drinking. Oh, people go to the movies without drinking? Really? Like, what? They have friends over for dinner without drinking. I'm like, no, that's impossible, right? No. And turns out trust me, there is a whole world out there, not just us recovering people that have a good life and do fun things without drinking, but there's actually a lot of really normal people that do things without drinking, and that was really foreign to me, totally foreign concept. So I did do service. I found a young people's group, and they said, why don't you make coffee? So I showed up because I was going to make the best coffee ever, right? But it kept me going to that meeting every single week. I had to get there early. I would help set up the chairs. I would make the coffee. Back then, we still had smoking meetings back then. So, the room would be like half filled with smoke, and you'd be like looking under the smoke to try to see the person across the table. It was really nasty. But then we would clean out the ashtrays and all that kind of stuff. And those service commitments, it talks about just showing up and being of service. It wasn't the kind of service where this great example of AA. It was just show up and help do whatever needs to be done so that there's a meeting for the newcomers that are coming in. And I wasn't great with getting a sponsor at the beginning. I had some friends that I had gotten sober with that were, similar in sobriety time, and they're like, you need to get a sponsor, you need to get a sponsor. And I felt like I just had to wait till I could find the perfect person, right? Well, I was pretty sick, and I wasn't really good at picking healthy people. So the first person I asked to be my sponsor wasn't all that healthy. We did some step work, but I still was trying to do way too much on my own. I was trying to do this whole step thing on my own, right? Like, I can, as long as I'm going to meetings and I'm going to step studies and I'm reading the big book, then I can do this, right? I can do this on my own and do these steps on my own. No, don't do that, please. Don't do it that way. When I sponsor women now, I'm like, don't do it the way I did it at first, And then at this young people's meeting, I met a guy, boy meets girl on AA campus, and again, the only thing that we did right when we started dating, I did wait a whole year of sobriety like they tell us to do before getting in a relationship, but we started dating right after my 1 year. And the end of that story is we are the exception. We are still married, 26 years later, whatever. But again, the only thing we did right, and I love because this came up in the concept and tradition thing about, participating and the autonomy thing, is I had my program, he had his program, and we made sure that neither of us made each other their higher power. What I did do, though, is the whole idea of, getting married and planning a wedding and starting this new life in sobriety kind of is what we do. We take our focus off of, we, meaning many of us, not everyone, but we often take our focus off of our sobriety because we get a little bit of that good life going after not drinking for a while, and life starts to get so much better, and so we start to take the focus off of our recovery. And so, but I was still really active in the program. We got married, and almost everyone, my wedding was alcohol-free, and it was like this really, really great time, right? Because so many people there were in recovery. And we decided we were going to move to Utah. So we moved here, and exactly what Grant was saying. I came into meetings here in Utah, and I'm like, you people are so weird. I'm like, you sing happy birthday, you clap, you call them birthdays and not anniversaries. Oh my God, it's so weird. And you're not doing it right? Like exactly what Grant was talking about earlier. But I knew enough and had just enough time under my belt that I was able to say, you know what, I know that if I don't get connected here and I don't keep my sobriety as my number one priority over my husband, over my job, over anything else in my life, I know if I don't drink, I'll kill myself. Because I still, at that time, unfortunately, I still had untreated depression. But I also had been coming to meetings often enough that I was able to watch what happens when people stop going to meetings. Right? I get my few years, I get my 5 years, life is really great. Oh, I'm so busy, I can't go to meetings. It may take them a while, but, I always say this, I've never had anyone, even if they don't pick up a drink, I've never had them come in the door of our meeting, poke their head in and say, hey, you guys, I quit going to meetings and it's really, really great out here. I've never, ever had anyone do that, whether they're drinking or even when they're not drinking. I've been around enough that I've watched people come back in after not going to meetings, and they haven't picked up a drink, but they're this close, or they're ready to kill themselves because they're so miserable. And I knew that would also be me. So I got connected here, and I found a home group. It was a women's group. And I was kind of a dry drunk. My husband was a total dry drunk. And so that wasn't a happy scene at home either. We almost got divorced on our first anniversary. And I'm like, okay, I know what I have to do for myself. And I found this group, and those women are still my home group. They are still some of my best friends many years later. They have seen me through so much life. Right? This is what we have to do, is I can't just come to meetings because I'm having a tough day and I need a meeting. I also have to come to meetings to be here so that when a newcomer comes in, somebody's here, right? If those of us with a few years of sobriety all said, hey, life is great, I'm sober, F you, I'm out of here, right? Who would be here when the next person needs us? So I have to give back what was freely given to me. Somebody was here when I came in, and I have to be here when somebody else comes in. And I also come to meetings so that I can hear what happens when people stop going to meetings, right? That I've heard it over and over again, and I have still just that healthy amount of fear. It says we don't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I have to keep that door open a little bit so that I can look into my past. When a newcomer shares with me about what they went through recently, I have to remember what it was like to be in that chair, because not one of us that has been doing this for a while hasn't been in that chair where you are tonight. We all had to be in the chair at our first meeting, in our first week, in our first month, in our first year, hanging on sometimes by a thread, feeling like there's just no way out. And for me, it was the women, that held me up. By that time, I had 5 years of sobriety, and I was not in a good place. And they surrounded me, and they held me up. And my life started to get a whole lot better because, oh, wow, now I'm back, I'm getting back connected again. And I'm doing a lot of service again and going to meetings again. And then life just got hard. That's what happens when we're sober for a while, is we get to do life both good and bad. We don't promise that life is going to get easier. We just promise that we're going to get a lot better at handling life when it gets really shitty, because it does. And you don't get decades of sobriety without going through some really shitty times in life. My husband and I, we wanted to have kids. We weren't able to. We went through the whole, and that grief, that lasted for years. The grief of month after month, not being able to conceive a child, wanting one so badly, doing treatments, spending all our money on treatments that aren't covered by insurance, and going through all of that. And then during that time, I lost both of my parents a few years apart. Both of them died while I was in sobriety. But one of the best things was I got to feel okay about that because I had finally done the work, right? When I moved here, I did get a new sponsor, and I did do the work, and I did do the steps. And I was able to make amends and have things right so that by the time my parents did die, I didn't feel like I had a lot of unfinished garbage. And, you know, it's really funny, and I tell this to people too when we're working on that kind of stuff about our past and cleaning up our wreckage and making amends and stuff, is that it's pretty amazing what happens when we do this work and we do these steps. Is everyone around me seems to start getting healthier, but they're not doing any work. They're not in recovery. They're not doing a program. And it's like, oh, well, things are better because I'm doing all that work. And either by osmosis or example or learning to set boundaries or whatever it may be, all of my relationships improved. And then those same women that carried me through all those weeks and months and years of coming to my home group and crying, A, because I was hormonal on all those medications for fertility treatments, but B, I was also in the midst of a lot of grief. Well, then my higher power had a different plan for me, and my husband and I adopted our baby. And I got to bring him in because I hadn't given birth. I got to just bring him to my meeting when he was like a week old, and so these same women got to see me through that joy. My sponsor was in the courtroom when we went to make our adopted child legally ours. Two of my closest AA friends were in that courtroom with me, and so the message there is that, if we don't pick up a drink, no matter what, things will be tough, yes, but will they ever be as bad as when I was drinking? I'm an example that is the case. I never, no matter how bad things got in my life as a recovering alcoholic, never once did I really believe deep down that a drink would make it better. My disease wanted to tell me that. My brain would say, oh, you feel really shitty, go take a drink. But I knew enough to finish that thought, play that tape all the way through. Right? Well, what happens when I take a drink? Oh, I can't stop. Then I start doing really stupid shit. Then I end up somewhere I don't want to be. Then I'll do something else I don't want to do. Then I'll lose everything that I have. And I don't want that to happen. So that's what my recovery looks like for me today is, just showing up, always making it number one. That kid is 18 years old now. He's a legal adult. He's about to graduate from high school. And boy, is he in for a rude awakening when he goes out on his own, because he's kind of a spoiled little brat. But no, he's a really good kid. He grew up in an alcohol-free home with 2 recovering parents. Our home is peaceful. It's quiet. We don't yell and scream all the time. We're not having knockdown, drag-out alcoholic fights like I grew up with. He's just a pretty decent, well-adjusted kid, and he's not out drinking and drugging like we had been doing for years by the time we were his age. We joke around that he is such a good kid because he did not get our genes. So in that sense, we're really grateful that we adopted our son, because our kid was screwed from the start between my husband and my past. Because his story's pretty remarkable also. He's another miracle. But the thing for me today is that, my disease is still out there, and it still wants me to drink. And my brain, just because I haven't had a drink for a long time does not mean that I am a picture of health. A lot of times my first reaction is still to go to that negative thought. It's still to make it all about me. How is this, whatever's going on, how is it going to affect me? But what I learned here, what you all taught me, was how do I put the other person first, right? How do I, when I help somebody else, and I have sponsees, and I would say to them when I first started working with them, you're just not going to understand how much more I get out of this until you start doing it, and tonight I have a sponsee and grand sponsees in this room, and, to be able to pass that on, we carry the message, not the alcoholic. But one of the things I love to do and to tell my sponsees, and now that sponsee uses it on her sponsees, is I say, I have evidence. I've been doing this long enough that I have so much evidence that this thing works, that this program works. Even if you don't feel it yet, even if you feel like, oh, I don't know about this whole AA thing, you're all so weird, I don't think this is for me. I said, you don't have any evidence yet that it works. Use me, use my stories, use what I've done as evidence until you get your own. Well, then I heard the sponsee share recently in a meeting. She said, my sponsor has evidence-based sobriety. So whatever's happening, the message is getting through. And, so we, that's what it's all about. And, the community that I find here and the friendships, the lifelong friendships that I've gotten here, I have friends that are not in recovery, that are really, really close friends. They all think they should be paying me to be their therapist because we go out for a hike and they start talking about stuff and I start spouting program at them and they're like, how do you know all this? You should be a therapist. And I'm like, oh, no. You have no idea. None of this comes from me. I did not do this alone. So if you are new or even if you've been around for a while and you're struggling, please remember that we cannot do this alone. I was one of those that it talks about in the book, the self-sufficiency, it got me nowhere. I was smart, I was independent, I was, a hard worker, and yet I could not beat this thing on my own. I had to do it with the help of all of you, and that's where my higher power, the spiritual part of this program, I don't want to get into it too much because I know newcomers get a little scared off when we talk about that whole God thing. All we have to do is acknowledge that we can't take care of this on our own. And so the way I looked at that was alcohol kicked my ass. I proved over and over to myself that I cannot drink safely. I cannot stop when I want to. I cannot go out after work and have those 2 beers that I think I'm going to have. I can't. I proved that over and over. So alcohol is definitely more powerful than I am. That first part of the first step, being powerless over alcohol, that was a no-brainer for me. I then had to dive into the part about how unmanageable my life was because, remember, I was really good at making things look good from the outside, and I was still lying to myself that my life was manageable. And the only way I could do that was turning my life over to something greater than me. And so at the beginning for me, it was, alcohol is more powerful than me, so there must be something else that's more powerful than alcohol, and I'm just going to find out whatever that is. And, we talk about figuring it out, right? And we always say that to sponsees too. Figuring it out is not one of the steps. I thought I had to figure out and really understand a higher power. It talks about God as we understand him. The longer I'm sober, the less I understand my higher power. The more mysterious it is to me. I just like nature for me is where I connect with the spirit of the universe and the higher power that guides me, and that higher power or God or spirit or whatever it is, it works through every one of you in this room. And that's how I stay sober. I think that's all I've got. I'm going to wrap it up and